أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Jurisprudence, the show where we delve deeper into the whats and whys of Muslim life in modern day society. Today on the panel we have with us Kashif Virk Saab and Shahzad Ahmad Saab, both missionaries of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Kashif Saab from Sweden and of course Shahzad Saab here in London. In today's show we're going to be looking at financial sacrifice. What does it mean for us as Muslims in the modern day? Why is it important? The different terms and names that we come across in day-to-day life, where do they originate from? And what importance do they hold or should they hold in our day-to-day lives? Let's take a closer look at this topic.
Observe prayer and pay the zakat and obey the messenger that you may be shown mercy. Flicking through the pages of the daily newspaper or the news channels on television, we see countless examples of injustice and cruelty. But we also see glimmers of the best of humanity who are willing to put themselves in discomfort for the betterment of others, to give back to humanity and not just take. Charity towards man, in the widest sense of the word, is the cornerstone of Islamic society and a constant theme in the Quranic teaching. Financial sacrifice, therefore, is an integral aspect of Islam and an expression of deep devotion to God and His creation. Although not unique to Islam, the principal concept of financial sacrifice takes the form of zakat, which is a prescribed contribution based on a person's wealth and income and is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The essence of financial sacrifice perhaps can be derived from the word zakat itself, which literally means to purify. Thus, money spent out of one's wealth ultimately renders it pure and lawful for the believers. A way of circulating wealth back into the wider society for the betterment of all. Zakat is a specific levy imposed upon capital beyond certain thresholds, and can only be utilized for certain categories of expenditure. Categories which have been spelt out in the following verse of the Holy Quran. Alms are only for the poor and the needy, and for those employed in connection with their collection and distribution, and for those whose hearts are to be comforted, and for the freeing of slaves, and for those burdened with debt, and for those striving in the cause of Allah, and for the wayfarers. This is an ordinance from Allah. Allah is all-knowing, wise. Therefore, while on one hand these charitable contributions provide for the needs of society, on the other, the act of giving in the name of God helps to purify the hearts of the contributor from all forms of selfishness and greed. Since the renaissance of Islam is taking place once again through the Ahmadiyya Muslim community under the divine leadership of Khilafat, we can once again witness the true spirit of financial sacrifice as observed in the early period of Islam. In today's program, we shall delve deeper into the philosophy of financial sacrifice, its various forms, the jurisprudential issues concerning it, and how, through the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we are once again witnessing the true spirit of financial sacrifice in Islam.
So again, a very in-depth and interesting look at the concept of financial sacrifice and all of the different forms that it can come in modern day life. Kashif, looking at one of the most basic and one of the most early forms of financial sacrifice, when we look at Islamic history as well, we look at the concept of zakat. Now, what is zakat? Why is it important? And why do we still practice this almost ancient practice in the day-to-day?
Among the 5 pillars of Islam, one is zakat. Now, zakat is an Arabic word which means that we heard to purify and to increase and develop something. So this also alludes to the spiritual and the other meanings of this word. Now, when zakat, as it is said, it is collected from those who are well off, and up to a certain amount they have property, or not property, they have wealth, or in other forms, and also it is collected on savings.
Right.
So that is also important to mention, that if you have a certain amount stored with you or in your possession for more than 1 year, then zakat is taken on that. Normally it is 2.5% of that amount will be given in the way of Allah. And as we saw in the VT, the beneficiaries, as to say, of the zakat money or the sum are 8 different categories who will receive this benefit in order to enhance their situation, and to, in a way, it covers actually all the needs of society, but it is a very minute sum. There are greater needs, so therefore the institution of financial sacrifice is much more broader than that in Islam. And in the Holy Quran it says that spend in the way of Allah. But one thing which is compulsory, taken from the rich and given to the less fortunate in society, is called zakat, so that all Muslims should give the minimum at least.
And what kind, and we've talked about the different kinds of wealth that zakat applies on and the different ways in which it's collected. And of course, zakat isn't the only form of financial sacrifice which is enjoined by Islamic principles and Islamic teachings. Shahzad Sahab, when we look at the world today, as we've seen in the VT and in the video in the beginning of the show, there are so many economic problems. I mean, we don't need to name them, but there are many. How does Islam intend, or how does Islam plan on tackling these huge and gigantic economic problems which are faced by the world?
So, Mansoor Sahab, you mentioned about these economic problems and these issues in modern day. In fact, we find them throughout history. And we find that, unfortunately, the stronger and more powerful nations have, unfortunately, exploited the weaker and more vulnerable nations. And, in fact, this is one of the root causes for the great imbalance that we have within the world. That people have gone into other countries and used their resources, and this encourages the concept of greed. And then we see within countries as well how that imbalance has further happened, is because we see that the society is driven by a very strong capitalist system,
Yes.
which essentially is that the rich will continue to get richer and the poor continue to get poorer. However, the Islamic system, the principles that it proposes, one of them being is that it considers the circulation of the wealth within society and the community. It considers it as the lifeblood of the community.
Of course, yeah.
And it prevents people, or just a small group, hoarding the money and accumulating it. Rather, it encourages for that money to be spent throughout and continue to circulate it within the community and society. And as Kashif Sahab mentioned as well, that zakat encourages that very spirit. So any surplus amount that we have in saving, if a year has gone past, then 2.5% is prescribed upon that. Obviously, we'll discuss in more detail about the concept of zakat. So it goes back into society and is in the use of the community. And in the same way, in this blessed era, we have the blessed scheme of wasiyat,
Yes.
which is 1/10, minimum 1/10, that is sacrificed on our income. So again, we see that the principle of Islam is on justice. It is on not to look at the wealth and others with greed and envy. So these are the principles that Islam proposes and establishes, which inshallah we will discuss in this program further, and its different aspects.
Yes, yes. So it's almost, I mean, we've talked about this previously as well, with the concept of zakat, wasiyat, and the concept of the Islamic inheritance, almost this three-pronged approach to continue this, as you mentioned, this lifeblood, this circulation within the economic system of society. And without that, we have this stagnation which we see in the modern day as well.
And also the Islamic system encourages charity and giving alms and helping the poor, as opposed to the other systems that we have in the world. So that's one of the unique distinctions that the Islamic finance system has.
And I mean, we're going to speak a little bit later about the difference between the concept of zakat and the concept of the tax, and these matters which are incredibly important to understand when looking at financial sacrifice. But I think the point also, just before we move any further, which is very important and almost pivotal in understanding Islamic sacrifice in terms of money and indeed time and everything else, is that we believe that these have been given to us by God, not as a consequence of our own strength or our own actions, but purely as a blessing and a bounty. And therefore it's not a favor from us upon others to give financial sacrifice, it's a compulsion upon us, it's our duty to help those. And of course at any point in life, we could have our positions reversed. And of course also in the hadith it says, whenever we look at positions of financial stature, we should look at those who are beneath us in order to remember the fact that everything we have is purely a bounty from God. Looking at the concept of zakat and all the other financial avenues that we've talked about in terms of sacrifice, where are these actually spent, and is there any sort of transparency for us to understand better as to where this money goes and who it benefits?
Regarding zakat specifically, you should say that the Holy Quran is very transparent, as it mentioned 8 different categories. Now there are broader categories like fi sabilillah, in the way of Allah. Now that is in the discretion of the Imam of the age, the leader, who would say that what is now needed in the way of forwarding or progressing the cause of Islam. But then there are specific categories as well. For instance, the needy. Now regarding the needy, the Holy Quran puts up 2 categories. One is fuqara, those who are poor and obviously poor, and they ask for help even. The society knows that they are in need. But then there is also the masakin, who are needy, but they do not express their need. So the Islamic system or the Islamic government should take care for their needs as well, and proactively go and help them. And there are other categories as well. For instance, one is gharimin, those people who are suddenly and unplanned afflicted by something, a natural disaster or something else, which causes a great disruption in their day-to-day life. Now the money of zakat will also be spent on these people. And there are further categories as well, like for instance it says that for the wayfarer. Now the Islamic system, in old days we also used to have these places where travelers could stay and complete their journey. For instance, if they were going to Hajj, there's a long journey on foot or by camel, anything, and it should be seen that their needs are fulfilled. And even in Jamaat today, we have that wherever you go somewhere in the world, there are help being made or services provided for the wayfarers. Now the Holy Quran says that the money of zakat should also be spent to better the roads, and even building these motels or hotels, or what you could say, to help the wayfarers. So these categories are mentioned in Surah Tawbah of the Holy Quran, and we saw them in the VT as well.
I see. So generally it's talking about the betterment of society and the whole, and it's beautiful to see how the Quran has not only stipulated the various categories of where the money is spent, but it's also given almost the commonsensical argument behind it as well. By splitting it up, it also enables a transparency for where this money is going. So that's talking about transparency, talking about the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran has obviously specifically mentioned the concept of zakat. But in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, there are many other forms of financial sacrifice. And just to name a few, the concept of Tahriq-e-Jadid or Waqf-e-Jadid, Janda-Am, Wasiyat, these aren't mentioned in the Holy Quran by name. So where do they come from, and why are they compulsory upon us?
Well, Mansoor Sahib, the Holy Quran in various places talks about jihad and striving with one's own internal struggle, but also with one's wealth. And you will see this mentioned many times in the Holy Quran. And this we also find from the lifetime of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that apart from zakat, for various expeditions or a project or anything, the Holy Prophet ﷺ would ask the companions to come forward and offer sacrifice of their wealth. And recently, Hazur Anwar Ayyadullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, in his Friday sermons, has been speaking about the great character of the companions. And one of the qualities that Hazur mentioned, these which time and time again came again, was the fact that their financial sacrifices, how much they gave towards the service of Islam and for the propagation of Islam, in addition to zakat. Now the thing is, the zakat, of course, is an obligatory, is an obligation, and it's mentioned in the Holy Quran as well. But if we was to just rely on the revenue that is collected from zakat, that will never be able to fulfill the grand objectives that we have for the propagation of Islam. We are in the blessed era of the promised Messiah alayhi salatu wassalam. And the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had prophesied the renaissance and rejuvenation of Islam in this era.
Yes.
And we have grand objectives. For instance, the translation of the Holy Quran, the publication of books, the establishing missions all across the world, sending missionaries, MTA itself, the studio which we are sitting in today right now, and this message is being conveyed to the corners of the earth. All of this requires great amounts of money and sacrifice. So therefore we have all these various definitions avenues that you mentioned, for instance, Tariq Jadid, Waqf Jadid, which systemizes the revenue, the collection of the revenue, and exactly where it's spent. And Hazur mentions this as well, that how in his reports as well, at the Jalsa, the annual convention, in his Friday sermons, of where this money is being spent, how it's being spent, and the sacrifices that people are being made. And all of this is in line with the spirit of the Holy Quran and the spirit of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and his companions.
Regarding the spirit behind the spending in the cause of Allah, we should remember that money actually increases when it is spent. It is like an investment. The Holy Quran says that Man zallazi yukrizullaha karzan hasanan fayuzaifahu lahu, that who it is who will give a goodly loan in the way of Allah so that Allah can increase it manifold for him.
Indeed.
It is the experience of Jamaat. We have seen it so many times that when you spend in the way of Allah, you are given so much in return. And Jamaat still keeps increasing, and it is amazing to listen to the Friday sermons where Hazur mentions the Waqf Jadid and Tariq Jadid, how much was collected each year, and it keeps on increasing. Now one would think that maybe when you spend in something, your actual capital would decrease, but here we see the opposite, that it keeps on increasing. Now this is in spirit with the Holy Quran's injunction. It says that give in the way of Allah and I will give you more in return, and not only in financial estimations but in other blessings as well.
It's interesting to see, isn't it, Shahzad, when we look at the concept of giving financially, it's not only just limited to the concept of Islam or Ahmadiyyat. I mean, people around the world, in fact, give money for the fact that there is this strong realization, often in the latter years of one's life, that when life finishes, none of the bounties or the pleasures or the financial stature of this world goes with you. I mean, of course, there's a very famous example of Alexander the Great, who had himself in his coffin with his arms outstretched on each side, just to exemplify and to show the people that I take nothing with me, and no man and no woman is exempt from this. So it's a beautiful thing to see, and also that by enjoining man and woman to spend in the way of God, it's not even for the sake of God. God doesn't benefit himself from our financial sacrifice. It is a benefit to us, and we are spending in fact for our own benefit. And it's beautiful to see how many people around the world, Ahmadi, Muslim, and indeed many other non-Muslims as well, have actually understood this and are now moving more towards the value of spending in the way of Allah.
And that's not to say that we give less importance to zakat and give more importance to the other avenues of Tariq Jadid or Waqf Jadid. Zakat is still of primary importance for us.
It's actually a question which is actually often asked. That
yes.
Does Tariq Jadid and Jandam and Wasiyat take away from zakat at all?
Of course not.
You pray the 5 daily prayers as an obligation, but still you do nawafil. In order to get nearness to Allah Almighty, even fasting, you fast during Ramadan, but even during the other times of the year, to increase your nearness to Allah Almighty. Same applies here.
It is actually because of zakat that it instills the habit of spending in the way of Allah Almighty, as you mentioned, that we then want to spend in other causes as well, in other noble causes, to help the propagation of Islam.
I think we also talked about whether or not it's compulsory. Now, we've talked about this before, Azan. Basically it boils down to the concept of belief and faith. That once we have said that we believe in the Imam of the age, the reformer of the times, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the Prophet ﷺ, it is then up to us, and it is our responsibility to follow him in what he sees fit. And of course, we do this in obedience to the message of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who didn't just say, recognize this individual. He said to follow this individual and to help this individual to propagate the message of Islam to the corners of the earth. And I think when we have understood and propagate our faith and say we are Ahmadis and we believe in the Messiah of the time and the Khulafa that follow him, it's then our responsibility in that faith to follow them in the instructions and the guidances that they give us, which are, of course, all in line with the teachings of the Holy Quran and Islam. When we talk about finances in the modern day, Kashif Sahib, it's very difficult to do so without mentioning the concept of interest. Now, interest is a huge thing. Of course, we could say the economic system in the day-to-day that we live in is almost entirely founded upon this underlying principle of interest. So how does a Muslim abstain from interest, and why does Islam forbid it to begin with?
Yes, in the Holy Quran, interest is mentioned by the term riba, which means to increase something that increases. And the definition would be that you give a loan to somebody, and before taking the loan back, you set that from this loan I will receive such an amount additional to that in the installments. Now this concept, Islam highly discourages it and says that this is the very source of social injustices, and social equality diminishes and in fact disappears in this way, because what happens is that only the rich people can give loan, and they will give it to poor people who take this money thinking that they will get immediate help.
Yes.
But in the long term they are actually losing so much money in the process of interest that they are giving much more back than they actually took in the very beginning, which in the end will result in what we described earlier, in this accumulation of wealth in the few hands of the world.
This hoarding of the wealth, as it were.
Yes. And as the Holy Quran also says that when giving a loan should be a good deed. You are helping somebody with that intention solely, that you are helping somebody. That is why the Holy Prophet ﷺ so much praised those people who granted respite to the loan takers and said that you can give it back when you have the opportunity to give it. And but the institution of interest, it actually creates these social injustices which Islam wishes to eradicate, and it is so much ingrained in the modern world. So we should actually find different ways of going about it, and it's difficult, very important that it's being discussed.
And of course there are many ways of doing so, and they've been very well documented before. But the main underlying principle is that when an individual can, I mean, it's almost like holding a hot coal. If you have to hold it, okay, but you let go of it as soon as possible. The point is, when in this modern day, when we have interest coming in via a current account, or interest coming in via a mortgage or similar effect, we should attempt and endeavor to try to rid ourselves of that interest as soon as possible, and to hold it for the least amount of time. Of course, we understand that in today's society, there is an element of necessity in some cases. An individual needs a house to live in, or for example, in the common day, where student loans, for example, these are things which one has to endure living in a society, but one should always remember the niyat and the intention behind it, and follow the guidance of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Holy Quran as far as one can. You've mentioned about the giving of money and how it should be with a pious intention. Shahzad Sahib, the concept of investment is very similar to this. But many people have asked the question that if gambling is unlawful and haram because of there's a possibility of a loss and a possibility of a gain, then why is investment into someone's business, which also holds a similar loss and gain possibility, why is this permitted?
So the gambling has outrightly been declared as unlawful and forbidden in very strong terms in the Holy Quran. And that's because that's simply a game of chance. You put your whole capital at risk. You put your whole capital at risk on one sort of bet or on one sort of condition. And if that condition fulfills, you win all. And if not, then you lose all as well. So that is why it's forbidden. It's an addiction. And Allah the Almighty has very strongly condemned that. In regards to business is something that you are investing in. Your capital is most likely to be secure. There is only a certain amount that you invest, which could of course go into loss, but you also make all the means possible, you make all the effort possible to ensure the success of that business. So it's very distinct from gambling, which obviously people sometimes can confuse and often ask this question. But as a business, you are investing, you weigh out all the pros and cons, and you make a strategic decision of when to invest, how much to invest, you secure your capital. So obviously there's more intricate details
Of course.
in regards to investing in a business, but with gambling it's just simply you put the whole thing at risk and you lose all if that condition is not fulfilled.
I think it's also an investment in you're investing in a shared potential loss or in a shared potential gain.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a very important point to note as well, that it's not that if I put in this small amount of money, I can possibly take money from everybody else without any sort of skill, without any sort of being involved.
Well
Indeed.
to make it a success.
Indeed, indeed. I think also, I mean, even in terms of basic economics, if you are investing any more than you financially can handle, anyone would call it that's a gamble. That's what they would say. In colloquial terms, you'd say he is gambling all of his capital right now on an investment. So even investments when you are financially unable or unstable to hold that is also a form of gambling in a way as well. So one should invest when one has the capital and the money or the financial backing to be able to do so. And that's, again, it all boils down to the concept that Allah says that He wishes ease for us and not difficulty. And there is a betterment in every commandment for the purpose of making the life of the Muslim better. That otherwise, if this was completely allowed and individuals would enter into these fields, they would be in financial turmoil, as we can see around the world, which is quite prevalent today. Kashif Sahab, as Ahmadi Muslims, I mean, we've talked about being in financial difficulty, and financial difficulty almost in today's day and age is synonymous with the concept of taking out a loan. As Ahmadi Muslims, when we take out a loan, if someone has a loan indeed, is Chanda and Zakat still payable on that, or do they become exempt from this?
Yes, the capital which you earn through a loan will be considered as your property, and as such you will give chanda or other contribution on the prescribed rate on that.
I see.
So it doesn't exempt you from chanda. That is very important to remember. So because of necessity you have taken it, but still you cannot be exempted from the very noble cause of spending in the cause of Allah. But one should remember that regarding sadaqah and these things, people ask that money, because as we mentioned earlier, in some cases you receive interest from the banks, and how to spend that money.
Yes.
So in the way of Allah, when we give sadaqah or other alms, we should try to give what is earned from legal earning.
Right.
That is what it is acceptable from God Almighty. But we should also remember the fatwa given by the Imam of the age, the Promised Messiah Islam, during his time, when he said that Islam had become so weak that it is in dire need of help. And in that case he said that if wealth is generated through interest, you receive interest from somewhere, it can be spent under the category Shat Islam, that is to spread the message of Islam. And he gave elaboration on it, that why did he allow for this. But he also said that it is only for a temporary time, and times will come in the future when Islam will gain strength, and this edict will not hold anymore.
I see. Jazakallah. Shahzad Sahab, just a final question.
Yep.
And indeed it's quite apt because it ties in with the end of one's life. When an individual has, say, for example, paid the wasiyat on, say, a property that he owns, or indeed she owns, when that property is then passed on to their children or other people, and the wasiyat has already been paid on that property, is the wasiyat payable again by the people who inherit it? And if it is, then why is this the case?
So when the children acquire that property, for them it's a new source of income now.
Right, okay.
So they will obviously, again, the rate of zakat and also the chanda or wasiyat will apply on that for them. Similarly, when they pass that on to their progeny, to their children, for them it will be a new source of income, and they will also, wasiyat and zakat will apply on that as well. And the beauty of that is that over generations, the whole of that capital, the whole of that, whatever the net worth of that asset was, will eventually go back into society. So as we were talking earlier in the program, that the concept or the underlying principle of Islamic finance is that the circulation of the wealth is the lifeblood of the community. So in that way we see that through this, it goes back into community and the society.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jazakallah. Today's show has been looking at and focusing on the concept of financial sacrifice in all of its forms. Of course, in future programs and in future shows, we'll be looking a little bit more deeper into these topics and trying to look at almost the nitty-gritty and the ins and outs of these issues. But please send in your questions and your queries and your comments to IJ, that's I for Islamic, J for jurisprudence, IJ@mta.tv, and we will get round to answering them as soon as possible. I'd like to say a very warm and heartfelt Jazakallah and thank you to our dear panelists, Shazad Saab and Kashif Virk Saab, both brilliant missionaries of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And indeed, a warm thank you and Jazakallah to all of our viewers at home. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم